So hi Dave, thanks for joining us today. This is a great insight, I think, into sort of your background. A lot of people will know you from the sport of triathlon and your different involvement in different areas. But it's also great to people understand perhaps where you come from and your involvement.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, Michael. I've had a look at one or two of the other videos you've done, and I'm very pleased to take part in this.
So thanks again. So I suppose we'd like to, with everyone, sort of go back sort of into the past. So look at sort of how did you first sort of come across triathlon and get involved in the very first instance?
Yeah, okay. Well, the past goes a fair way back for me. Probably around about the early 90s. A friend of mine started up with triathlon, and I thought that looks a bit quirky and a bit interesting. And I'd just finished a very ordinary career in team sports, so I was sort of looking for something to do, and pretty much the only exercise I was doing was running.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there's got to be something a bit more interesting to trying to get fit. So I took up triathlon and joined the Newcastle Triathlon Club, I guess in about 1993 or thereabouts. Yeah.
And what was do you remember the first race you did, or any sort of any memories of that first one?
I remember probably the first year of doing triathlons. Pretty much I was taking up swimming and biking for the first time, so I was very ordinary in both of those activities. So it was pretty much trying to self-seed myself at the back end of the waves at the pool. Being so relieved getting out of the pool and hopping onto a bike, which was relatively more comfortable, and then finishing that and getting on with the run course, and eventually enjoying the event. And the feeling of finishing was something I guess I shared with most people who do triathlons, no matter where they come in the field.
So obviously, yeah, you were a runner, so you sort of enjoyed that, sort of getting to pass everyone in that instance. Did you sort of travel and do any races outside Newcastle at all, or?
In those days, we probably well, it got to the point where we coordinated our family holidays with wherever triathlons were.
Okay.
Along the east coast of New South Wales, and then into Queensland as well.
Okay.
So down as far as Husky, I guess. I remember getting up early to do the Kernel events. That was when they would start at 8:30 in the morning. So the 2-hour drive to Sydney was achievable. And then as far north as Noosa, did Noosa a few times and loved it.
Okay, fantastic. What would appeal to you about Noosa?
I guess the vibe and the atmosphere surrounding the whole joint. And then walking along the beach in the days surrounding the event, and almost literally bumping into the stars of the sport, and just the feeling that I'm competing in the same race as international champions.
Yeah, that's something sort of quite cool about the sport of triathlon, that you do rub shoulders with those people. Taking us forward now, obviously at some point in that journey you became an official. What was it drew you to sort of starting out as a TO?
Starting out as a TO, it was pretty much, I wouldn't say I was forced into it, but I was certainly forced into retiring from triathlon. I developed arthritis in one of my hips, and it was just too painful to run. So in about early 2005, I finished my triathlon career, and coincidentally in Newcastle, Newcastle was hosting the World Duathlon Championships that year.
Oh, okay.
So I put my hand up to volunteer, and I kind of enjoyed the whole experience that day and the planning leading up to that. And I guess it gave me a sniff in perhaps how I could contribute to events from that day forward as an official, perhaps. So I put my hand up to do an officiating course in Port Macquarie, in association with Ironman Australia later that year.
Okay. And do you remember who actually taught that first course to you?
Yeah, a couple of legends of our officiating program, Rob George.
Yep.
And Ross McLennan.
Okay, yeah. So it's a couple of early names there. Excellent. Did you actually participate as an official at the Port Macquarie Ironman that year?
Yeah, I don't remember it much, but I guess I must have because we did our field of play experience the following day. Um, I guess I did my best to keep out of trouble. I'd
Yep.
say.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that first experience as a TO obviously can be a little bit daunting for some people, and as you say, you just almost want to stay out of trouble. Yet probably as the future's gone on, you probably got into trouble a few times, but we can sort of get to those certainty stories. Um, in those sort of early days, was there anyone that particularly that sort of shaped your journey or sort of guided you?
Yes. Well, certainly, definitely. After meeting Rob George at the training, I kept in contact with him, and I asked him would he be my mentor. And I guess we didn't exactly have a formal mentor-mentee relationship, but the fact was that he was always at the end of the phone if ever I had a question to ask or whatever. And I really admired his coolness and his calmness. He wasn't the sort of person who wanted to get out in the front of a crowd and say, "Look at me." He was more the sort of guy who worked in the background and achieved outcomes that way.
And I mean, your first experience then stepping up into a more of a senior role. When was that? What happened that day?
Not long after I became accredited as a level 1 official, I nominated for an event at Kalala, which is about a couple of hours south of Sydney. And I thought, that's great. We're planning our family holidays down there, and that's what we did. We drove down there and all that. But the trouble was there were no other nominees. So I sort of landed, it was probably my second or third event as an official. I sort of landed as the sole official, trying to look after an event which had about 300 or 400 competitors over 4 or 5 different races. So I guess I was thrown into the deep end, but at the end of the day, after so much stress leading up to it and throughout the day, I sort of had that feeling of exhaustion and relief, similar to actually doing a triathlon, and I realised that I loved it. It really helped me understand prioritising what I need to do on the field of play as an official too.
Yeah, so it's quite a unique situation to be like the only official, and with 400 or 500 athletes, different races, and you're still learning your craft and what to certainly do. So the big lessons for you out of that experience, what you really take away from that?
Well, certainly in those early days, and it goes through to today as well, I guess seeking feedback from the other stakeholders in the event in terms of your performance. So throughout the day, I was always checking with the race director, how am I going, basically? I'm keeping out of trouble, I guess.
So you kept the race director happy from that point of view?
I think so. Yeah. We still have a relationship, so that's good.
Okay, that's good. And I suppose moving forward, obviously you've learned things over the years, and there's no doubt, obviously people know you're sort of known in the sport now, obviously for your approach to quite critical analysis in terms of risk, also in terms of, I suppose, your analysis of the race competition rules. Where do you think the interest in those sort of areas sort of came from?
It probably came from my experience in real life as a professional engineer at a power station, where you make critical decisions most days, and most of those decisions are based on risk and taking the best path forward to ensure the safety of your staff and your plant. So understanding the risk management process is something I guess I took into officiating, and I guess I was pleased to see that that was part of the role as an official, particularly on the senior technical team. A technical delegate needs to have a good understanding of risk management and a good understanding of working with people to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. So that was fairly seamless in my mind. And I think I was fortunate too that triathlon is a bit of a growing sport. And curiously, triathlon is one of the few sports that actually does not have a fixed field of play. So there isn't a rectangle. There is, like in tennis or football or a circle or an oval, like Aussie rules or cricket, where you can fairly manage the field of play in terms of risk of the competitors. Triathlon is nothing like that. And you've got so many more stakeholders, right through from spectators who are variously on or close to the field of play, right through to the owners of the field of play, whether they be council or the local police who allow you to conduct your bike legs on the field of play. And then the risks of triathlon are just so varied, and they can be related to exactly where you are. If you're in Darwin, you would have certain aquatic risks that you wouldn't have in an indoor pool, for example, or even in New South Wales.
So you've been at an event in Darwin to see an operation?
I've done some training of officials in Darwin, which
Yep.
involved participating in an event up there as an official, and similarly, the same sort of approach was at an event I was at in Townsville, and I guess I've got a bit of a funny story about that particular event. So there was
do tell.
I'm sure. Registrations were going fairly well for the Townsville event. Up until about the Tuesday before event day, when a crocodile was sighted off the Strand, which is where the swim course was, a straight line 1,500 metre swim course, and 5 days before an event, there's a crocodile sighting. Let me tell you, there weren't too many late entries or event day entries for that event. But that certainly brought in various people, and I think I was TD for that event. So you bring in various people to try and assist you, and how do you manage this particular situation?
So what is the process? Like, we don't have crocodiles every day at our events. So, and you could have, anything a whale could be turning up at your event or whatever, but what was the process you went through to sort of, minimize, the risk to athletes being near a crocodile even?
A different hazard at different events, but the process is the same. If it's not a crocodile, it could well be just a runabout coming onto the field of play on the swim course. So you really got to be careful of the boundaries of your course. And certainly with the crocodile in Townsville, we decided to reduce the boundaries. So instead of having a straight line swim course, we had a couple of laps in just off a bit of a bay near where the original swim course was, but it was still in the open water. So during the week, we co-opted a teleconference. That's right, with the various stakeholders, and you call in expertise when you can. So we got the people dialing on were the race director, myself, Queensland's equivalent to the EPA, so they're basically the crocodile spotters who do that for a living, and we actually brought about a risk management plan with various control measures to minimise the risk down to a tolerable level, if you like. And part of that was on race day, with the race starting at 7 a.m, for no swimmers to enter the water until the helicopter had done the buzz over and radioed down to the race director that everything's clear, there's nothing sighted in the water. So that was going fairly well. About 6:45, I was just standing on a tiny headland there with a good view of the swim course. The helicopter was overboard, but I also had a radio, so they hadn't done the call out yet to say that everything's clear. And then I see something like 36 legs get into the swim course on boards. So the local surf club, with all their kids and adults on their surfboards, got in to take up their positions on the swim course. So slight concern, something to remember for next year, I guess. So where the call has come through, everything's fine. We're about to start, and right near the headland, we hear lots of slapping of water underneath, really close to where we were standing. And because of our state of mind, we thought the worst. Luckily, it was only some mullet, and that brought about a bit of a laugh. The course went ahead, everyone was happy, and we lost nobody.
Yeah, it's true what you say about how you've often, you can pre-frame something because, if we often don't talk about the word shark, for instance. We talk about marine creatures and things like that because if you say shark to an athlete, there's a certain fear response to that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, if you're expecting to see something, then whatever you hear will be that thing. So it's a really good sort of lesson to learn out of that. Along your journey, obviously, you've experienced a whole different sort of range of events. Is there sort of a favourite event you sort of like to be involved with?
I guess because of my interest in risk management, the events that I really enjoy are those events where I feel that I can add value in working with the race director in setting up a good course, a reasonable course, and a safe course. So they're pretty much regional events where there might only be 200 or 300 competitors, where you really, you have a good relationship with the organising, the race director and the organising committee, and it gives you a great amount of satisfaction, I think, when they listen to you and they give you the freedom to assist them in putting the event up.
And do you find there's a sort of a bit of a legacy from those times that then, okay, you're there 1 year, but then they take some of those learnings forward for themselves into the future?
One thing I encourage is that they have their own event manual or operating manual, if you want to call it, so that as you go, do the same sort of event year after year, and it's a quality circle approach as well. You review how you went in the previous event. So if there are any good ideas in the previous event, you jot them down and you use them in the next event. So it doesn't matter who's there, the event continues to improve year by year.
Now you brought up this term quality circle. I don't want to put people to sleep, but just in 30 seconds or less, what's a quality circle? What does it mean?
Plan, do, review, and improve.
10 seconds, even better, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
So no, it's true. Sometimes the risk management side of our sport can be a little bit dry, but it's great to have someone sort of like yourself sort of being involved. And obviously, your day-to-day job, you're involved on the sanctioning side of things for New South Wales. How long have you been in that role, and what do you sort of? Is it just the risk management that you enjoy in that role, or is there other thing?
I've probably done a part-time role for Triathlon New South Wales for about 10 years now. The first few years was in a voluntary capacity, and probably about 6 or 7 years ago, the board of Triathlon New South Wales decided that they needed to have a bit more of a professional approach, and that coincided with me taking an early redundancy from when I had a real job. So I pretty much seamlessly slipped into doing risk management with Triathlon, and I now work 15 to 20 hours a week for Triathlon New South Wales. A lot of it's in sanctioning. Other stuff is in basically talking to race directors around the state, assisting them in improving their events, and I enjoy that. And I've had a bit to do in creating Triathlon Australia's event operations manual, which we hope will end up being a vital or critical tool for all race directors.
So over your sort of 10, 15 years in the sport, what are the sort of big changes you've seen from your point of view?
I guess there's been a lot of emphasis in recent years on the safety of the competitor. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, if we're running a race throughout a community, we might just have volunteers manning an intersection. These days, that wouldn't be allowed. You've got to do a certain course on traffic management to be allowed to control traffic. So over the years, races have become safer. And from an officiating side, I think they've become fairer too, as officials have become more competent in what they do on the field of play, particularly in managing the bike course.
Looking at other sort of styles of event, I know you don't do a lot of them, but you have done some sort of ITU events. I know we stayed together in 2009 at the Gold Coast. How was that sort of experience for you, being part of the grand final back then?
Well, clearly it's a very important event, and clearly, to my mind, it was just opening the page on a different style of triathlon. No longer are you there with your sleeves rolled up, working with the race director to get a good, safe event up. What you're there as an official, you're basically there to determine whether something is black or white, and you make an opinion or a decision based on the rules of play. And the ITU rules, although they're very similar to our Triathlon Australia rules, they are slightly different, and they're catered for elite competition.
Certainly up at the Gold Coast there, I remember we got up at very early times and walking through the Gold Coast from one side of the bridge to the other at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
I think there was one instance we saw something we weren't necessarily meant to see one time.
That's correct. Yes, we were talking about this just before this. I think it was closer to 3:30 actually, Michael.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes it felt like 2:30 with your snoring. You're walking through trying to get a taxi driving past to take us to the event venue, which was probably about 2 or 3 kilometres away. Riding past on the back of a motorcycle without a helmet. I recall at like 4 a.m. in the morning was the technical delegate for the event. So clearly, becoming a technical delegate also involves getting contacts at the right time and organising those sorts of free lists to the venue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a low level of risk of being caught, given there was hardly anyone around at that time. But yeah, it wasn't something we'd necessarily see today. I think people are a little bit more constrained and aware of the public profile they sort of take into the sport. Obviously, I mean, you have volunteered a lot over the years with the sport. What keeps you involved? Apart from the job, if you didn't have you weren't doing the job for New South Wales tomorrow, I get the sense you would probably still stay involved. What keeps you turning up?
Good question. I guess it goes back to the early days as an official. I often left the event with the satisfaction of knowing that even in a small way, I'd contributed to so many competitors achieving their goals. And even if the goal was to finish, I contributed to that. Hanging around at Port Macquarie pretty much after all the work had been done, or Port Macquarie, or even the old Foster Ironman, an hour before the event finished, you just felt swept up in the emotion of trying to will these last competitors over the line. So through the years since then, there's still, to a degree, that extent of satisfaction in seeing guys and competitors have such a great time at so many good events.
Yeah. Was there a particular memory or incident that sort of stands in your mind, or was perhaps inspirational to you at the time?
They did a very good job. They still do a very good job at Ironman Australia in telling all the spectators where the last few competitors are on the course. So we might find out, and by then we know their names, we know their family and their history in triathlon, I guess, and it's probably their 15th event, and they're half an hour out from finishing, and there might only be, say, 25 minutes to go before the cut-off time. So those sort of memories and trying to will those guys home, they certainly stand out.
Is that something you'd recommend? Obviously, a new official, has their first taste of an Ironman, making sure they are there at midnight, or the 17-hour cutoff.
Certainly, because as officials, most of the technical team pretty much knock off halfway through the run. We have a few officials out on the run, but not most of the technical team. So the time is theirs after that. So they're very often encouraged to hang around, put on their civvies, and go and enjoy the sport, because it's our sport, and we have contributed to that.
And have you had some obviously enjoyable moments there? Not necessarily just watching the end of a finish of an Ironman, or other sort of times with officials.
With those weekend events, often the officials have to gather on the Saturday. There might be some competition on the Saturday, but usually the main event is on the Sunday. So where it's a weekend event and we're all staying at the same sort of premises, pretty much invariably there's a night out organised, a dinner, and there's some of the nicest memories of being a triathlon official. meeting other officials with a similar view of life, but different backgrounds coming together and chatting about, I guess, their experiences and their families, etc. And some of my dearest friends to this day, I've met through triathlon officiating.
Do you, I mean, over your time, do you see similarities in the, I suppose, the better officials or the officials that, endure in the program? And
I think the people I've admired over the years as who I think are better officials are those officials who not only know the rules of the sport, but they can show empathy to the competitor. Typically, those officials have been competitors, so it's easy for them to show empathy, but that doesn't have to be that case. If you know where their competitors come from and what's in their mind, you're in a better position to be able to have that conversation with them, and certainly to be able to make that decision on the field of play based on what you observe. One of the sayings I say at our training courses is, we're there to penalise intentional misbehaviour or unfair advantage. We're there to manage unintentional unfair advantage. And an example of that is you might see a pack of bikes all struggling to get up a hill. They're all going very slow. Clearly, not all of them, perhaps none of them, are intending to get an unfair advantage. But by the black and white letter of the rules, it suggests that they may be all due for a time penalty because of drafting. But if we consider that piece of advice, we manage unintentional advantage. What we would do for that is do everything in our power to break up the pack, or even just support them getting up the hill and make sure that they're aware that you're there on the other side of the hill, so it's broken up when they're actually in a position to gain an advantage by drafting.
Yeah. I mean, you've learned a lot over the years. I mean, was there a particularly challenging experience you had at some stage during that time that, a situation that you're in that, forced you to either learn on your feet or, adopt other methods to get through that moment?
I can think of two, Michael, and both of them involved events which were qualifying events for ITU World Championships. So in terms of the context of the event, pretty important events.
Mm-hmm.
So there are age groupers at each event. The first one I was race referee at, and a competitor came up to me after the event. She had come second in her age group. It was determined. She wasn't filing a formal protest or anything, but she'd come second in her age group, and she complained she observed that the woman in front of her, at the time while she was competing, she didn't realise that she was in the same age group category because she had a different letter on the back of her calf. So this particular race director had the habit of putting different letters on calves depending on which age group you're in. So a little bit of digging on our part revealed that right up to just before race day, the event director had got the age group categories, the 5-year categories, wrong. So, as an example, instead of, say, a 20 to 24-year-old category, it was a 21 to 25-year-old category in the mind of the race director. So this was corrected on race morning, but it still didn't stop at the registration the wrong letters going on 20% of each category. So one out of each of the 5 years of category had the wrong letter on their calf. So there's nothing in the race competition rules which says anything about letters on calves or anything like that. So the lady who had come second, her argument was, I was running behind this girl, I was catching up to her, but I realised that I wasn't competing against her, so I just backed off and I was happy to be where I was because I knew I was the first one in my category to cross the line. And in the mind of the girl in front of her, well, she just ran her race and she found out pleasantly that she was the first girl in her category to cross the line. So what do you do? Because there's different points awarded to first compared to second. Luckily, we had the chief executive of Triathlon Australia there. So I approached her and I told her the dilemma, and I suggested that perhaps we could vary the points awarded so that we had 2 first place points, even though it wasn't a tie, and no second place points awarded. And she agreed with that, and it turned out that both competitors were happy. As long as they got their points, they were happy, and that was solved.
So what was the learning you took away from that? Obviously, you solved the problem and worked with the higher powers that needed at the time, but what did you take into other events after that? What was your sort of learning?
I guess the importance of listening. What you see isn't necessarily the case that you should be considering. Because what I saw was one girl finishing in front of the other girl. Listening to their arguments, perhaps showing a bit of empathy, and obviously always being calm during that whole process. And as I said a few minutes ago, trying to get the experts in, so seeking expert input to help you make an informed decision.
Yeah, okay. But I'm a new official, and I look at that and I go, well, there's nothing in the race competition rules. There could have been someone, another 100 metres up who could have been, first or whatever, or 100 metres behind. You don't know. I don't agree with your decision. What would you say? What would you say to me?
I would refer that official to the race competition rules, and up in the first couple of pages of the race competition rules, there's some commentary about what the rules are intended to be there for, and that's one of those comments. Actually, one of those dot points is to penalise unfair play. So I would show that official where every part of what we did was in accordance with the philosophy of applying those race competition rules. In my view, most of the rest of those rules give you examples on how to apply the rules.
So, yeah, I think it's a really important point to get across, because, there'll be people who watch this and go, well, I still don't agree with what you said. But I think it's that overriding principle we obviously need to look at in terms of the values of the sport.
I mentioned there was 2 examples.
Yep, we'll just quickly go through the second example. That would be great.
Yeah. The other example was I wasn't even at the event. I got a call from the race referee. The event was still in progress, and she told me that 67 competitors had cut the swim course on the first wave of the swim course. What do we do? So the rules are fairly clear. If you cut the course,
disqualified. Yeah.
But elsewhere in the rules, when it talks about intent, it talks about penalising intentional behaviour, and the implication of that is that you don't penalise unintentional behaviour, you manage it. Mm-hmm. So it turned out there was a swim wave of 99 competitors. The first guy, who was not even an age group competitor, he was a pro, he missed one of the turning buoys. And the next 66 swimmers followed that swimmer. I think you could mount a fair argument that none of those 66, and probably not even the first guy, intended to break the rules. Mm-hmm. So that was a difficult issue to manage. So we called in the big troops. We called in the chief executive of Triathlon Australia again. And
was this another qualifying race, was it, at the time?
There was another qualifying race with points on the line. Interesting comment was, he asked, has anyone protested? And the answer was no. At that stage, it was only seen by another official. So the decision was made not to do anything, but to monitor the position of those particular competitors, where they finished and the points they were awarded for where they finished. And if necessary, if we thought that somebody was unfairly getting onto the Australian team, we would take action and provide points to someone who perhaps was unfairly advantaged in that swim league.
Because I'm fairly sure that was leading into like the 2018 World Championships, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of demand, as there often is, for a home World Championship. So, Again,
It would have been easier. Would have been easier if the whole course had cut, the whole wave had cut the swim course. But
yeah.
no, so we had to work that out.
So yeah, I mean, and obviously there's a lot of detail. We could certainly go into it, and that might be something for another call to look at, some of the details of those sort of scenarios we're often faced with. I suppose, why did the official call you? I mean,
Yeah, good question. Considering I was actually in another state at another event at the time, I was that official's mentor, and that official, luckily, had the training and the nous and the pragmatism to seek advice from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's a good lesson for officials right through triathlon. If you're not sure about a call that you're thinking of making, you usually have time to seek advice from somebody else.
Yep.
Or you can make a considered call.
So yeah, I mean, and that's it's a really good point. If you were to get, I mean, the new officials watching this, what are the 3 key lessons you think a new officials should take when they sort of go to their events, say in their first year or 2 of officiating?
Know the rules. Attend the pre-race briefing so you get an understanding of the context of the event and how the rules shall be applied. And if you've got any doubts, ask somebody.
Yeah, I think that last one's a big one, because you're not alone as official. Like, you've had experiences where you've asked questions of people, and you've found them reasonably engaging in terms of responding to your questions.
Yeah, and it's very rare that you attend an event where you haven't learnt something or you haven't been placed in a situation that you hadn't been before.
Certain great advice, and thanks, Dave, for sharing those experiences with you. I mean, obviously we're sort of coming to the end of our time now, but it's been sort of great to chat with you and get some of the insights into how you officiate. I think you have an exceptionally detailed approach, which I think can be a benefit to a lot of people to see how they can apply that to their own officiating experience.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and all the best.
All the best to you, Michael.